Hello and welcome to RPA and AI Live 2018. My name is Ian Hawkins. I'm the editor of the PEX Network. So it's a very warm welcome to you wherever you're calling in from. Around the world we have attendees from the biggest network of process excellence professionals anywhere, from organizations of every size, in every sector, and at every stage of the process excellence journey. This digital event is our way of bringing people together from across the globe to share knowledge and ideas with some of the leading lights of the industry. If you haven't used the ON24 platform before, a reminder that you can use the Q&A box that appears on your screen at any time. If it's a technical issue about the website, our team will rush to your aid. And if it's a question for the speaker, he's going to be answering those as we go through his presentation. So please ensure you have your flash player enabled and all of your volume buttons are switched on. Before I hand you over to our presenter, quick reminder that later in the series we have presentations from Automation Anywhere. On Tuesday we're talking to IBM and Appian. On Wednesday, Celonis and Help Systems. And on Thursday, we have Minute. So, with my commercial break over, let me hand over to our opening speaker. Guy Kirkwood is the Chief Evangelist at UiPath, shaping the future of work by democratizing automation through RPA and AI. And his presentation is called Why Companies Go into RPA and Why They're Wrong. The floor is yours, Guy Kirkwood.
Ian, thank you very much indeed. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you happen to be in the world today. As Ian mentioned, this is the first of 7 events taking place over the next few days. So I'm delighted to be kicking it off, and actually kicking it off in hopefully some style that gives you an idea and gives you something to think about. So as Ian mentioned, topic of my call, my presentation or our presentation is why companies go into RPA and why they're wrong. Really, this came out of a series of conversations that I've had with Forrester, initially in Chicago at the Forrester Digital Transformation event, and then in London a couple of weeks ago. It's also why you will not see any corporate slides. You will see the images, and I'll just take you through the story. So, and I would also emphasize, as Ian said, that if you do have any questions, please do use the Q&A box, which is down the bottom of your screen. It goes live review, preview, and Q&A. So use the Q&A box, ask the questions, and I will answer them as we go through, rather than wait till the end. Let's crack on. So, why are companies going into RPA, and what are we seeing within the market? That's really what I want to cover to start with. So, if you look at, and this is actually Diego from Forrester, he did a presentation immediately before mine in London, and as he says there, the adoption of new technology is becoming embedded in the change of business. So, and actually the technology is not really the important thing, it's the change that's really important. And RPA is but one tool in your toolkit that you can use to make that change. But in any change, any transformation in an organization, you do actually need some help. I like this slide. And the help in this case is from the RPA platform, or what's commonly known as robots. In fact, I have a severe problem with the word robots because it doesn't really describe what RPA actually provides. And indeed, the quicker we get rid of that word, the better as far as I'm concerned. But nevertheless, robotic process automation is something that is growing extraordinarily quickly. And that's not just for us, but also our main competitors. So if you look at the way that the market's developing, everybody wants to get on the bus. Everybody wants to get on board and use RPA. And there are several reasons for this, but essentially organizations are using RPA initially as a first step, or one of the early steps in their route to digital transformation. And in fact, in the HFS, Phil Furst, who's the head of HFS, chief analyst and chief executive, he did a study with KPMG, and 81% of the 1,200 executives from Fortune 1000 companies, Fortune 1000 companies that they polled, so it's both HFS and KPMG, polled, said that they were going to either increase or significantly increase the amount of investment they were going to make in RPA in 2018. That was right at the start of this year. And so we're starting to see it. So if you look, this is the only graph in my deck, but it is nonetheless incredibly impressive. So Michael Jansen, who's the sort of analyst guru for Everest, did a poll within one of his webinars, and he asked the audience, and there were about 1,000 people on the call, how RPA was going to grow within their organizations. And these are organizations that were already implementing RPA. And as you can see there, the growth rate within organizations is just stratospheric. And so let me give you an example of what we're seeing and where we're seeing it. So if you look at this slide, this building is actually the Admiral headquarters, which is in Cardiff in Wales. Now the building itself has 12 floors, so think about this as a mental picture. It's actually got 2 stacks of 6, but you get the picture. So that's the top of the building you're seeing there. So Neil Davis, who runs the RPA Centre of Excellence and runs the implementation of RPA within the organisation, started 18 months with one license, one UiPath license, an evaluation license, which he got for free. In fact, anyone can get it for free. And within 18 months, the operation Admiral now has robots in 10 of their 12 departments. So you think about the 12 floors, each floor has a different department, and they've got robots in 10 of them. By the end of the summer, there will be robots in every single part of the business. That cuts across all of their operations, from the traditional corporate functions where it started in finance and accounting and procurement and HR, then moving into the industry-specific functions in terms of claims processing, first notice of loss, dealing with brokers, into the customer service operations, so call center operations and so on, because UiPath has both unattended robots and attended robots, so back office operations and front office, and so on. So you can see that the spread of this throughout the organization has been quite dramatic and actually very, very fast. And what that means as far as and why organizations like the private equity organizations and the venture capital companies are so excited about this is 2 things, really. The first one is the success of Blue Prism. So Blue Prism floated in Easter 2016, and their share price has gone from 78 pence to over 19 pounds, which is incredible growth and massive success for them, of which I'm really delighted. Well, I'm particularly delighted, but I'd even be even more delighted if I actually bought any shares when they originally floated on AIM. I stupidly didn't, but they've really created the market, and we are capitalizing on that, really. And the second reason is that there is no area where RPA can't fit. So if you look at organizations like Workday, that's a 30 billion market cap business, that focuses entirely on the HR stack. They're moving into F&A now, but they're focusing entirely on the HR stack. And if you take Salesforce, that's still it's a 98 billion market cap business, and that's still focused entirely on the sales and marketing stack. Whereas with RPA, as we've seen from the Admiral example, there is no part of the business that this robots can't be used, and I think that gives an indication about the potential spread, and we'll talk a bit about that as we go through. But one myth that I want to allay is the fact that, and really the topic of this talk, is that most organizations go into RPA with the idea that they're going to reduce headcount. I mean, that's what the business case is predicated on, that we have X 100 people working on our operation on a particular process, we're going to roll in the robots and we'll reduce that headcount by half. But that is not what we are seeing. So RPA, once it's rolled out to organizations, instead of it being a headcount reduction, what we're actually seeing is that companies realize that the value of the people, of their people, the value of that human capital within their organization is much higher than they expected it to be. And so what we're seeing is that those people get redeployed within the organization. Once they have the boring, mundane, crappy stuff that they've previously been doing removed and automated, then it allows them to genuinely move up the value chain. And we're seeing that time after time after time. Automation Anywhere is seeing it, Blue Prism is seeing it, Kofax is seeing it, WorkFusion is seeing it. All of the competitors in the market are seeing this type of activity. And actually, Helen from Gartner has done a study on this. So Gartner now believes, well, in fact, yeah, they believe that by 2020, that RPA and AI will become a net job promoter. There will be more jobs created as a result of using automation than will be eliminated. And if you think about it, there's a lot of talk about RPA being the fourth industrial revolution and AI. And if you think back to the first industrial revolution, or prior to the first industrial revolution, in about 1760s, 98% of humans worked on the land. And does that mean that because that figure is now 2%, that 96% of the human population is unemployed? Of course not. Jobs will change, and so there will be new jobs created. And so that's why it's so important to think about how you're going to redeploy your people as opposed to just eliminating those particular jobs. But in fact, there is a fundamental issue here. How do you get to the kernel? How do you get to that nut in that picture? Because ROI, the return on investment, is the most important thing. You don't do automation, you don't do digital transformation change, you don't do those transformation projects just because you want to. There must be an ROI. Now, there are two things that you've got to consider. First one is the return on investment for using RPA, regardless of which technology you decide to use, is actually extremely good. And that is why the majority of the consulting, system integration, and outsourcing companies are now training up their people as fast as they possibly can, because it's a really good first step, which we'll come to in a minute. The second issue is that the return on investment that you achieve by doing RPA can be plowed back into the transformation program, and that's what the consulting organizations are doing. So they're using it as that wedge entry, if you like, because they own the relationship with the C-suites of companies, the Fortune 1000 companies and small and medium enterprises. We don't need to. So because they're doing the implementation, then it's a really, really good first step in that case. But, and I love this slide, when you look at structured versus unstructured, RPA is really good at dealing with structured data, rules-based activities, but it's pretty poor at dealing with unstructured or semi-structured data because the exception level is too high. And I very deliberately put the JPEG or PDF in that picture because native PDF is structured data. So you can strip the data out of a native PDF, but a JPEG, a picture, you can't. So you need to use computer vision for that. And in fact, if it's text, then you need to use intelligent OCR. So we're working with a number of organizations and baking some of that capability into our product set, into our platform. And in fact, in computer vision's case, this is something that UiPath is particularly good at, which is why a lot of the outsourcers have been using us pretty much since the start. Because in most cases they're having to operate over Citrix, so they don't have access to the underlying application, and they're looking at a bitmap. For a human, that's relatively straightforward if field changes, but for a robot, it needs to be that computer vision is required, and we're particularly good at that. So that combination of RPA plus AI allows you to deal with the semi-structured, the unstructured, and the structured data, and that's where this issue about AI comes in. So AI in most organizations, when the board says we want some AI, they generally have pretty much no idea what they're talking about. Because AI is made up of a conglomeration, a mass of different tools in natural language processing, machine learning, deep neural networks, named entity recognition, and so on and so forth. So AI is this combination of tools And so you need an open platform in order to bake these type of capabilities into something that is able to be bought by organizations in one go, as opposed to going to lots of different organizations. And that's what UiPath does. And if you look at the heat that's associated with this, then what we're seeing is that, in fact, I did a webinar about 3-4 months ago, and I asked in the middle of the webinar a question, what are you doing with AI? And I gave the respondents or the listeners 4 answers. Nothing, at POC or pilot stage, in production, or extensively. And interestingly, the answers were almost exactly the same to the percentage mark as where RPA was 2 years ago. Does that mean it's going to take 2 years for AI to catch up with where RPA is now? I don't think so. I think what we're going to see is in the next 18 months that our AI is going to be where RPA is today. And interestingly, if you go back in time to April last year, I was talking to Kathy Torborn, who's the lead analyst at Gartner that covers RPA. She and I worked out that the adoption rate for RPA within global enterprises, so that's billion-dollar plus businesses, was about 5%. Now, today, that is 15%. So, and that's not just UiPath, but it's also our competitors. The market has market penetration of about 15%, which, if you've read Geoffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm, that's very close to the 15 to 18% when any new technology, forget about RPA for a second, this is when any new technology moves from early adopters into the mainstream. So the growth that we collectively have seen so far in the market will pale into insignificance beside what we're going to see over the next 2, 3, 4 years. And that's also why the VCs and private equity guys are so excited. And most of them tend to be guys, I have to say. So again, let me give you a couple of examples of what we're seeing, where we're combining this. In fact, before I do that, I got a question from Tushar saying, what is RPA? The RPA is robotic process automation. It is, if you think about it, as a way for organizations to move data through and between their systems without using people. So the trouble with IT systems that are built up over many decades is that generally, unless you invest an awful lot of money and time in putting together systems that operate at an API level so that these different systems can talk to each other, then a lot of them are still not doing that. So if you take the shared service market, which is where I come from, that's my background, there are 1,800 shared service operations just in Europe alone. 80% of those do not even have a single instance of ERP, so enterprise resource planning, so Oracle or SAP. What that means is that all of those organizations have people who are manually transferring information through and between their systems. It could be from green screen applications, old mainframe operations. It could be from the web. It could be from ERP or CRM systems, and so on. But physically moving the data between those systems is what RPA does. If that doesn't answer your question, come back to me, Tushar, and I'll explain some more. We've got another question, actually, from Srijar. What risks RPA adoption bring to data security and protection compliance? I'll actually come to that in a second. Well, no, in fact, I'll answer it now. So the RPA adoption has generally been done by the business, by business operations, not by IT. And it's been done because, as I mentioned to Tushar, that in most cases, these old legacy systems don't talk to each other. So the only way of actually transferring the information between those systems is to use people, is to use humans. So those people sitting in the cubicles in swivel chair processing. So when you've got people doing it, then there's a risk to compliance and governance because people are seeing that data. When you put that onto RPA, when you automate that process, then that operation generally takes place in most cases, behind a lock screen. So you can't actually see that data at all. And there's always the question, what happens when a robot goes rogue? Robots can't go rogue. They can only do what you tell them to do, and they will do no more. So let's say that you've got data coming in, that gets put into a Dropbox or an email folder, and that triggers off the activity of the robot that does that task. It will only do that task. Now, the advantage of robots is that they can do multiple tasks sequentially. We're actually going to concurrency by the end of this year, but you can actually get the robot to do multiple tasks during the day. And it's based not on the complexity of the task that you ask it to do, but based on the time it takes. So if you've got a process that takes an hour for a robot to do, then it can do 24 in a 24-hour period. If it only takes 10 minutes, then you can do 144. So it's based around time. And what we're going to see over the next towards the end of this year is changes in the way that commercial structures are created in order for you to be much more flexible in the way that you actually buy robots. Because it doesn't matter whether you buy from Blue Prism or Automation Anywhere or us, UiPath, you're still paying for an annual subscription license. And that will change into robot hours or robot or per transaction or even gain share models for some organizations. But in terms of the protection and compliance, robots are now being used actually to help meet regulatory requirements. So you think about GDPR, which is a big topic at the moment. Robots are now part of compliance operations within banks across Europe and insurance companies and retailers that are actually helping those organizations meet their regulatory requirements. So I spoke to the SEC and the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK, about exactly this topic. Were they happy with the fact that robots were producing their compliance information? And they were. They are. And the reason for that is that it's consistent, it's timely, they can do it, and it's clear. There's no errors in it, or no errors unless you put the errors into the data going in. But there's no error in the processing of that data. Interestingly, the authorities wouldn't take machine learning because, by its very nature, in machine learning, the answer changes depending on the data set you're looking at. So the answer it gives today will be different in 6 months. So again, if that hasn't answered your question, then please come back to me. Let's go to the next question. This is from Stefan. Hi, Guy. Can you talk on COE? Typically, how does it look in a big group multinational with, say, 20 companies worldwide? COE, generally organizations, that's a good question, Stefan. Generally organizations set up their COE, their Center of Excellence, to actually manage the rolling out of the robots. And that tends to start in the place where robots were originally put in. So, and in most cases, that tends to be within the finance function. But as those systems grow, as we've seen with the Admiral example, as those systems grow and expand throughout the organization, then where we're tending to see those operations sitting now is within the shared service operation, within a global business service unit, whatever is called GICs, Global In-House Centers. So that tends to be, because that cuts across the whole business and provides services, and actually it makes those shared service operations much more effective. So where you've got 20 companies worldwide, in your case, Stefan, I would say that setting up a COE within your shared service operation, your GBS operation, regardless of where it sits, it would be a really good place for that. And in terms of the operational capabilities required within that COE, that's actually covered with the latest version of our Academy, which is our training platform. So originally, Academy was set up to train people how to build robots. But with the latest version, which was out a couple of weeks ago, which is called 360 Degrees, then that also covers all of the non-technical roles as well. So you can train up the people within your organization, again, completely free of charge, you're required to create the COE and run the COE. So it's business people, it's business analysts, it's how it fits within the organization, it's the communications you require with the business, it's how IT plays a role, and so on and so forth. So you can find that out by going to the UiPath site and then look up Academy. So let's, I've now got a whole shed load of questions come in, so we'll go back to those in a second. So let's go, I was going to give you some examples of what organizations are actually doing. So let's go to the next slide. This is very interesting. Okay, so this is, I can't tell you who it is, which organization it is, because they've asked us not to. However, this is an organization that's one of the big four audit companies. Which narrows it down somewhat. This is actually for their Indian audit business. So this is the core part of this organization's operations. And as it says there, they've now automated 45% of the audit process. And they're not just using a combination, you're not just using RPA for that, you're using a combination of RPA plus natural language processing plus machine learning. And they're achieving an 85% accuracy rate. Compare that actually with using IBM Watson, which they did before, which was 25%. So using a combination of these tools, which are also much, much cheaper than using IBM Watson, has actually achieved some pretty staggering results. And another example of that, which I can talk about, is an insurance company based in South Africa called Hollard. That's Hollard. And our implementation partner there is a company called Lark AI, which Janice Stridham is the chief executive and founder. And again, you see, they are using Watson, but they're using Microsoft Cognitive Toolkit, that's the MCT bit, plus Watson, plus Abby. Abby is an intelligent OCR engine, which is now baked into our platform as well. And the whole thing orchestrated by UiPath to deal with totally unstructured data. This is emails coming in from customers. So they've got 1.5 million emails coming in a year, and now 98% of those are handled autonomously. No human sees them. The entire operation, from the email coming in to doing sentiment analysis, named entity recognition, intelligent OCR, stripping out the data, structuring that data, allocating that to a robot to send out a response depending on what the thing is, all of that's automated. And I don't know what the original cost per transaction was, but for anything that's where the transaction cost has gone down by 91% is pretty staggering. So congratulations really goes to Gianni and his team for an absolutely brilliant example. So let's go to another couple of questions. Richard asked, what are the reasons why organizations don't update their legacy infrastructure to enable API or API integration? That's a really good question. The answer is they never do. If you look at the way that IT operations run within organizations, they have so much work to do, particularly when you look at organizations that are growing through M&A. So mergers and acquisitions, you end up with this whole alphabet soup of acronyms and spaghetti type operations that IT departments try and stay on top of. So remember at the start of this conversation, I mentioned Workday. So the reason that Workday was so successful is because people didn't, they within their HR departments, had a whole plethora of different technologies that they could use. But Workday came in and said, you just use the vanilla version of Workday and it will sort out your problems, which is what's driven the growth of that organization, the growth of that business. So organizations don't update their legacy infrastructure, in some cases because they can't. So the very first deal that UiPath did with an outsourcer was with Dell, so Dell Computers. So Dell had an order processing system that was 20 years old. It was a green screen application, Richard, and they couldn't get rid of it because it was so embedded in everything that the organization did. They tried to change it 6 times over that 20-year period, and every time they tried to change it, something fell over. So that's why they used people. They actually had 1,000 people doing offline order processing for Dell. And UiPath technology was used to automate that process. So in many cases, that legacy infrastructure can't be changed, and without breaking substantially, or a massive cost, or indeed an incredibly long time to do. So you can think about, I mean, some IT people consider RPA to be a dirty fix, a sticking plaster that you put over old legacy applications. And in many cases, I don't mind that analogy, because you can consider our robots to be a disposable asset. Let's say that you're replacing your entire legacy operations with a bright, shiny new straight-through processing system, but that will be rolled out in 3 years' time. My recommendation to you is use the robots now, so you can reuse some of the people, as I mentioned before, and focus on rolling out the bright, shiny new system. And at the end of the 3-year period, throw the robots away, because you're only paying for them on a yearly basis anyway. So as soon as your new operational systems are running smoothly, just dump the robots. You don't need them anymore. Most organizations have that in plan, but in many cases, what we're finding is that the business case for building the bright, shiny new system then disappears if you don't have to change that. But that's another topic for another day. Richard, come back to me if that doesn't answer your question. Gareth has a question. Is there an element of organizational maturity which needs to be in place before implementation of RPA, i.e. data or process benchmarking? Gareth, that's a really, really good question. And actually, I'm going to move to this slide here, which I've been doing a lot of work with. We've been doing a lot of work with Craig Leclerc. He's one of the lead, in fact, the lead RPA analysts at Forrester. And this is exactly the topic that he's been looking at, because what's driving a lot of the growth in this market is actually the growth of the ecosystem. So as you can see the birds on the line there, we've actually got 4 ecosystems working with UiPath or using UiPath. So first of all, there's the AI type companies. So the Microsoft's Cognitive Toolkit, the Watson, the Abby, the Humley, which work on ontologies for natural language processing and so on. Those organizations want to bake themselves into our platform because we're growing so fast. So our annual recurring revenue went up by 850% last year. And it's actually accelerating. So at the start of last year, we had 100 customers. By the end of last year, we had 700. Now we've got over 1,200 customers. So the adoption rate is really accelerating. The organizational maturity element comes from the consulting or system integration companies. Remember I said that these are the people who own the relationship with the C-suite of your organization. They want to help you achieve the organizational maturity that can be accelerated by RPA. So RPA, look at RPA as an accelerator for the organizational maturity rather than having to do one followed by the other. So some organizations, the really early adopters, started RPA without doing any transformation at all. Actually, I think that was a mistake, and they probably admit that as well, because you need to do both simultaneously. As I said, RPA is really good because it's relatively fast, it's relatively cheap, and the ROIs are really good. So the Deloittes, the PwCs, the EYs, and so on are training up their people as fast as they possibly can, because that's what they're selling into the organizations, into their customers, as that first step on that digital transformation journey, as that organizational maturity, as you say. One of the companies that we're working very closely with, and in fact they are speaking, I think tomorrow or on Wednesday, is Celonis. So Celonis is also backed by Axel, it's our VC backer. So Celonis, what they do is process mapping, so benchmarking, process mapping, data. So, and what they're actually doing, their system works out all of the paths and the variances and the exceptions and so on for a particular process. At the moment, the output of that is essentially a graph or a process map that organizations are using to make their processes more efficient. What we're doing with them, because we're baking that capability into our platform, is that by the end of this year, beginning of next, so 2018, early 2019, the output of the Celonis activity will be a XAML script, an XAML script, which will be effectively be a robot. So essentially what you're doing is that you are mapping what humans are actually doing, because when you look at any process, what people are actually doing is different from what's in the standard operating procedure or indeed in the documentation. They are never the same, because humans cheat. You know, they find easy ways of doing things, they find workarounds. So if you can work out what the humans are actually doing, it makes it much more accurate in terms of, and reduces the time to implementation for RPA. And you think about it, you know, I came from BPO market, so you think about it 20 years ago, the knowledge transfer to move work offshore to an Indian outsourcer, most of the pain came from people actually not saying what they're actually doing as opposed to what they said that they should be doing, or what was in the documentation. So Celonis, in terms of process mapping, is really, really important for this. And that's why we're working so closely with them. But in terms of the organizational maturity, do both simultaneously. Don't wait to do the organizational maturity, because you can get analysis paralysis in that case. But don't kick off RPA without having any thought to how it's going to develop through your business, because otherwise you run into problems. Again, hope that answers your question. Another question from Marianne. Is there any area where RPA is not worth the resources? Again, really good question, Marianne. In most cases, anything that requires more than one, generally, a process that requires more than 1.5 full-time equivalents, FTEs, to do, is worth looking at automating. Because remember, you know, you are not releasing that person or that 1.5 people entirely. What you're doing is taking away the mundane, boring stuff that they don't want to do in the first place. And I'll come to that in a second. So generally, organizations look at anything that requires 1.5 people or more is worth looking at automating. Now that could be up to thousands. And in fact, our largest customer, which is actually going to be announced, I think, in a couple of weeks' time, they've started with 2,600 licenses, 2,600 robots. And interestingly, 50% of those are in the front office. It's a retailer, actually. So in-store, helping customers and helping staff, and 50% are in the back office. So most of what we're seeing now is that equal split between front and back office. So yeah, anything above that. Let's move on, because I'm cognizant of time. What's essential? Let's look at the direction of travel. So essentially, what's going to happen is that AI and automation, RPA, and all of these tools, and essentially BPM tools and process mapping and so on, they're all going to sometimes come together. And as I mentioned about the ecosystems, the work we're doing with Craig, those things are going to sort of not merge exactly, but the growth of that ecosystem where organizations use those, I hate the phrase best of breed, but you know what I mean, those technologies that come together to provide the service that you want. And essentially, they're going to disappear. And they're not going to disappear because they're not going to get used. They're going to disappear because they're going to be used everywhere. So Andrew Ng, who's a professor at Stanford University, he was talking about AI as the new electricity, and I describe it as the new water. Frankly, no one cares where unless you're some eco-mentalist, no one cares that how the electricity is generated and how it reaches your house, as long as when you turn the switch on, the light comes on. And the same with water. As long as when you turn on the tap or the faucet in America and clean water comes out, you don't really care about the water cycle and how the whole thing works, just as long as it works. And that's exactly what's going to happen, I believe, in terms of the adoption of RPA and AI. And it will just disappear, become the infrastructure, the business infrastructure by which organizations actually run their businesses. If you think about, as I keep coming back to my background in BPO and shared services, BPO and shared services, business process outsourcing, was the way that organizations ran a lot of their operations. The thing about RPA is that you don't need to offshore that. The robots can sit in a cupboard or a data center at least, or on the desktop of your operations onshore. So it will just be a standard way that these operations run. And actually, here's an interesting thing. Remember I mentioned about how RPA mimics the human activity of moving information through and between systems. So it mimics using the keyboard and the mouse, generally. The work that Julie Shah's working on at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, is fascinating. So what she's working on and her team is linear temporal logic. So you can consider LTL to be mimicking the human cognitive capabilities as opposed to the human physical capabilities. So if you think about RPA as the human physically moving information through and between systems, and LTL is one step on that human decision-making capability. So the reason I've got Go on that slide is that that's a really good example of LTL. So if you take, everyone knows about the Go story. DeepMind, Demis Hassabis and his colleagues developed AlphaGo, which basically was not artificial intelligence, but artificial intuition. And then AlphaGo Zero beat AlphaGo, which was designed by humans and watched humans play, just by playing itself. And it beat AlphaGo within 2 weeks, I think it was. So it's pretty staggering stuff when you start to think about artificial intuition. And I tend to use that as opposed to artificial intelligence when I'm having conversations. But ultimately, I think where we're going to move to, and this is where the venture capital and the private equity organizations think it's potentially going to move to, is literally one robot per employee. If you think back to the 1950s when one of the IBM bigwigs said that there was a possibility that the US was going to have up to 5 computers, and you think about Bill Gates in the early 80s talking about a desktop for every person, and that's essentially, we think, is where this automation is going to go. So you will have the robot running those things that you don't want to do because it's just dealing with applications that you don't need to look at, and it's just doing that as part of your role. But then there's your augmentation of helping you to do, using these AI tools, helping you to do the stuff that you do want to do. And what I'm expecting to see is that any reduction in headcount over a short period is going to be more than made up for by an increase in the number of people doing customer service operations. Because that, I believe, is going to be the true differentiator for organizations moving forward. How they deal with their customers. How do you improve your customer experience? And if you are using automation to assist your employees, what you effectively end up with is digital transformation being not a technology issue, but a cultural issue. And that is the topic of conversation that I'm having with a chap called David Johnson. So Dave, another Forrester analyst, and I are going to be working on a paper towards the end of this year on exactly this topic. We had a conversation in Chicago where we were talking about what we were doing, and we realized that actually what we were doing was exactly the same thing. So digital transformation, culture change within organizations, accelerated and enabled by automation, means happier employees. And happier employees means better customer experience. And I'm not making this stuff up. Here is a brilliant example. So Carl Nolan is the chief executive of Generali Link. So Generali is a massive Italian headquartered insurance business based out of Trieste, about 80 billion euro turnover. We're working with Generali across 14 countries, but in Ireland we're working with Carl and his team, and that quote is unbidden, and it's so powerful. The mood music has changed. Our people are happier, and we now measure the service in terms of compliments. That is a radical departure from a customer service operation that existed before we put in the automation. So that culture change, the reason that organizations go into RPA is to reduce headcount, but they're wrong because what it actually achieves is happier, more engaged employees. And we'll start to see that time and time and time again. So that was, we're at 44 minutes. That's a good slide because that articulates exactly what I do as a job. So when I'm talking to people, when I'm on stage, when I'm doing webinars and so on, that's just a small part of what I do. What I really, really do is listen. I listen to the people in our ecosystem, to our partners, to the people who are doing the academy courses, to the analysts and so on, so that we can stay agile as an organization. So let's go through some, and so, follow me on Twitter, email me, so guy@uipath.com, dead easy, with any questions that you've got. So let's crack on. I think we've got another 22 questions that are now coming in. So please do come back to me with more questions. But if I don't get to them now, then please email me and we will answer those questions for you. So question from Lars. So let's crack on. How easy is it to implement robots yourself? Can businesses themselves implement them? The answer to that, Lars, is yes, you can, and you should. So the reason that organizations go into RPA is because generally, as I mentioned, IT departments take too long to actually come up with the bright, shiny new system. And so businesses have found that RPA is a way to actually achieve the aims that they want to without going to IT. But I hesitate to say that because it's really, really important that you include IT as early as you can in the process. Many of the failures in RPA, particularly with the early adopters, were where business ran off and did it themselves and they didn't involve IT. I mentioned before about compliance and governance is absolutely critical. The advantage, in fact, the thing I'm most proud of since I joined UiPath in 2015 was that I said we've got to give away all our training. And in fact, Automation Anywhere also does the same now. And I think WorkFusion does as well. So you can do the Academy course, which I mentioned. So the Academy course is completely free of charge for everybody forever. So you can train up your people, you can train yourselves and train up your people on RPA and all of the courses associated with creating a COE, creating that center of excellence and how it fits into the business free of charge. And there's a community of people, about 150,000 people around the world that are actively implementing robots using UiPath. And there's a community on our forum which is very, very active. So if you've got any questions that are specific to your technology or your infrastructure, then you go on the forum and you will definitely get the answers to the questions that you have. So business can implement them, but involve IT because you're going to need them to spin up the servers or the desktop systems or whatever you're actually implementing the robots on. And you can start, as I said, for free for the training. But also, if you're in a small or medium enterprise, then you can actually use the software for free as well. So we have something called Community Edition, which is a totally free platform, completely fully operational. And again, that's free for small companies below $1 million turnover, for individuals, for not-for-profits, and for universities and so on. And we're working more and more closely with these type of organizations because it's to our advantage that we get more and more people using the software and au fait with it, because that actually drives the adoption rate across their organizations. So yes, business can, but please do involve IT to start with. Right, let's go to this question down here. Milland, is there any recommendation on the size of organization and the number of people doing manual transactions before they should go into the RPA route? And again, I probably just answered that question in terms of the SME. SME, you can have a couple of robots plus the studio, which is the bit of software that develops the robot, and Orchestrator free of charge. You can try it out and run robots in production free. So Milland, and if you're a larger organization, generally, in fact, in all cases, actually with one exception, large organizations will always use an implementation or a number of implementation partners to help them get there. But most, I suppose 90, in fact, probably 98% of our customers, and we've got 1,200, are all billion-dollar plus businesses. But that we've grown in numbers of employees from about 120 at the start of last year. We're now 940, which is pretty staggering. Actually, we can't grow fast enough for the adoption rate, which is why we get the implementation partners to actually do the implementation and the selling for us as well. In fact, so yeah. Come back to us if that doesn't answer your question. Christoph's got a question. I've explained RPA as something parallel to running a macro in Excel, but not just within a spreadsheet, but also across a computer desktop. Sort of, Christoph. You can think about, when I first started thinking about robotics back in 2014, I considered it was really the same. I thought it was like a macro on steroids. And essentially it is. But it's a lot more easily controlled. It's a lot more easily run than the macros that are written of old. And of course, it cuts across all applications, not just the desktop ones, but all of your enterprise applications as well. So I hope that answers that question. Emilio asked, how do you differentiate AI with RPA? That's dead easy, Emilio. RPA deals with structured rules-based activities. AI deals with the unstructured or semi-structured data. So think about it. Let's think about semi-structured data. The work we're doing with ABBY, for instance, that's ABBYY if you look them up, is that you think about invoicing. There's only one organization in the world that actually mandates their entire supply chain use the same type of invoice, and that's Walmart. It's one of the big customers in the US. The rest of the world, you get your invoices in multiple different formats, different sizes, different fonts, different positions on the page, different background colors, and so on and so forth. That is semi-structured data. So all the data is there, but actually getting at it is really difficult. And so ABBY, that's what they specialize in. One of the things they specialize in is turning that semi-structured data into structured data. Now, would you consider ABBY to be AI? They are using machine learning now, which helps. So you have to do less templating. So with OCR, you need to use templates generally. But there you're talking about semi-structured to structured. So AI, think about unstructured data. RPA, think about structured, essentially. Jeff. So what percentage of current applications of RPA occur in back office processes? And do you see it moving into the front office? Good question. Last year, Jeff, it was 70%. So the split between our back office and front office operations was 70-30. So 70% was back office, 30% was front office. Since it was really the back end of last year, and certainly into this year, that figure is becoming much closer to 50-50. So that's you think about the elimination or automation of those and eliminating those boring tasks of moving information through in between systems, whereas augmentation, agent augmentation, is something that is really coming to the fore. So you've got NICE, who one of our competitors that focus entirely on the front office. They do some back office stuff, but it's generally front office. WorkFusion does a bit of both. Automation Anywhere does both front office and back office. Blue Prism is focused entirely on the back office operations. They don't do front office stuff at all. So it depends what sort of operations you're looking at, but definitely RPA is moving into the front office and increasing speed. A question from Nicole. What type of companies are leaders really? What kind of companies are leaders really taking advantage of RPA, and in what industries are coming on board? Good question, Nicole. Okay, so the first organizations that started doing this actually were technology companies or manufacturing companies, but as soon as it became obvious that there was value in using RPA, it was the usual suspects that got on board. So it was the banks and the insurance companies, so BFSI, so banking, financial services, and insurance. About 45% of our revenue comes from banks and insurance companies. There are several reasons for that. One is that I mentioned earlier about M&A, so mergers and acquisitions. Many of these organizations are grown through M&A, so they really do have a spaghetti mess of technology systems that they need to corral. So use of RPA within that circumstance is good. Secondly, and this is peculiar to UiPath initially, although the others have caught up now, or catching up, is around compliance and governance. So I don't mean compliance and governance of the robots operating within the system. I mean compliance and governance of running financial services operations. So you think about KYC, to know your customer, anti-money laundering, AML, and particularly GDPR. The cost of putting in systems, and by systems I mean things like master data management, was prohibitively expensive and took an awfully long time to put in. So which is why those systems took a long time to actually gain foothold within the banks. Whereas RPA can provide the same thing. So you think about it. Let's say you're a customer of an insurance company, and you call up. By the time you've gone through security, the robot will have rushed off and got all of the information on all of the products that you have bought, what your claims history is like, and so on, and provides the agent with a single version of the truth. So that helps not only with know your customer and anti-money laundering, but it also helps with GDPR, because when that customer says, "Can you eliminate me from your database," then that right to be forgotten, then the robot can rush off and do that, and across the multiple different systems that an insurance company has. And the corollary, of course, is that you massively improve customer experience. Remember I said that separation between, or that coming together between employee engagement, because the employees are not having to toggle between multiple different systems or hand people off to different departments because they've got that single version of the truth. And the compliance and governance, that tends to be what's driving it. But essentially what we're seeing is that across all geographies, so 45% of our revenue comes from North America, 34% from EMEA, and 21% from Japan. Then it cuts across all industries, all geographies, and all service lines within those industries as well. So the leaders in the market, actually Everest have done a really good study on this recently, which is called the Pinnacle. And the Pinnacle is something that's worth looking up. So those Pinnacle organizations that are using RPA and AI are in the Everest report, so I recommend you having a look at that. So we have a couple of minutes left. I think I'll answer one more question, and then we will answer the other questions when separately when we're offline. So let's have a look. No, in fact, let's just stop it there, because there are some fairly specific questions. So I was trying to find a general one that would help. But so I will answer all those questions. So last couple of minutes. As you've heard, I'm fairly keen on sort of spreading the message that this stuff is A, real, B, efficient and effective, and cost effective, and C, it's something that you should consider doing. As we cross the chasm, so as we move from those early adopters into the mainstream of organizations, and as more and more organizations bring RPA into the fold, and then AI dealing with the unstructured and semi-structured data as well, there is that window of opportunity for your organizations to actually capitalize on this. My advice is to go and speak to, if you're a company, go and speak to your strategic consulting partners. Go and speak to, and that may be one of the large guys, or maybe one of the small specialist organizations like Symphony or Minefields or Roboyo. Those organizations really, within our partnership ecosystem, have really come up with some or LARC, which I mentioned before, have come up with some really interesting use cases. So do a study on that. The second thing I would say, with a minute to go, is watch out for tomorrow. Okay, I cannot say any more rather than keep an eye on the news and keep an eye on the UiPath website tomorrow, because there is some major news coming out either later on tonight or tomorrow, which is it positions UiPath quite well. So that's all I'll say. So thank you very much indeed for joining. I'm delighted by the number of questions I got. I hope I've answered some of them. Do drop me an email with any questions that you have, and I will either answer them myself or I'll get the team to answer them. But I'd like to hand back to Ian, and thank you all very much for joining.
Thank you very much, Guy. Thank you very much for giving us a PEX Network exclusive there as well, so keep your eye on the website. I'm looking forward to having my robot companion, although I'm going to do my absolute best not to ever call them a robot. Thank you very much, Guy, and we're back in half an hour with Manish Rai. Thanks very much, everyone. See you later.